In front of me is the RF135mm f1.8 IS, and this is part 2 of my review of the Canon RF135mm. If you are interested to know how I feel about it, especially for portraiture on autofocus and image quality, I think this video is for you. I'm Richard and welcome to Jittery Productions, and today I'll be talking about the RF135mm f1.8 IS, and this is part 2. If you have not seen the part 1, do click on the link up here because that's important. Part 1 will cover things like physical, how I felt, IS, things like this. Part 2 will really be focusing on autofocus and image quality. So let's first talk about autofocus, but before we start, I have to shout out to SLR Revolution for helping me reserve this lens. I know that worldwide there is quite limited copy of it. I got to use it and I want to thank them for it. But you know, they did not sponsor me in any way. Just want to thank them for helping me to reserve the lens. So first, this lens here, in terms of autofocus, I'm a portrait photographer. I'm not going to shoot sports. So there's two types of things that I'm interested for autofocus: accuracy and, of course, moving erratic subjects for humans. Now, first, when it comes to accuracy, I have done shoots overseas in Japan, and of course, locally, I did about 5 photo shoots so far. I'll say as this lens is accurate. Full stop. 400 plus shots, 300 plus shots. Only maybe one that is soft, and there is about another 1 or 2 more that are soft, and that's probably because the camera has focused on something that I don't think is desirable. So overall, if you ask me, this lens, assuming that the focus point is on the right spot, for example, eye detection, on the right spot, this lens should have a hit rate of about 99%. That is how confident I am in the hit rate of this lens. Now, that is hit rate and accuracy, and I have to once again emphasize that I love Canon's eye detection when it comes to auto-focusing shallow lenses on the human eye. I still think it's better than the competition. Now, when it comes to erratic subjects, so how do I test it? Well, I didn't. My wife decided to ride a horse in Japan, and she's not a trained rider in any way. The horse is a tame horse, definitely, but the horse knows that my wife is good for bullying. So what happened is that the horse decides to move wherever and however he wants. And if you have shot any form of horses, in fact, this is my first time shooting it, I really didn't know what to expect, but the horse is always constantly moving, shifting around, and never stopping because it doesn't listen to my wife's command. So as such, I have to shoot whenever there is opportunity. I can tell you that this lens and this camera works perfectly. Every single shot, as long as the eye detection is on my wife's eyes, it's accurate. It is perfect. That is how good the autofocus when it comes to reacting to moving subjects. Just to note that the horse is moving faster than an average walking speed. And it's erratic. It goes this way, that way, whatever way that it wants. It doesn't listen to my wife. So you must know that this is definitely more challenging than a standard walking human shot, and definitely it moves more than most normal portraiture will ever do unless you are running. And the erraticness is probably worse off than running itself. So that's really it. The autofocus for moving erratic subjects is fantastic on this lens. Let's not forget also, the ground it was on ice. I had to run and take a shot whenever there's an opportunity. This lens reacts really quick. That's what I want to tell you guys about the autofocus. I think I'm very confident to say, for the purpose of portraiture, unless your subject moves super erratic and super fast, which I can't test out, if you are just moving erratically at a decent speed, I think this lens will have no issues at all. Next, I'll talk about image quality. Image quality, in one word, fantastic. Now, it's said that I sold my Sony and my Sigma 135mm about 2 weeks before I purchased this lens, else I would have done a comparison to let you guys see. But based on my memory, this lens should not be worse off than the GM135 and slightly better than the Sigma 135 for one reason. The Sigma 135, if you have seen my review before, has a very slight hazing when you zoom in. This lens doesn't suffer for it, so it should be as sharp as it could be. And as such, when I shoot out my window on this very flat, far, picture here, the sharpness in the center is excellent. the sharpness at the corners. When you look at the leaves, you can still see details all the way to the very corner. Does show that this lens is very well corrected for sharpness all the way to the edges. Now just a note, this is a 135mm lens, so stopping down will of course increase depth of field, but just note that if the foreground subjects are still significantly further than the background subjects, you will get a bit of out of focus, like this shot here. So I shot some landscape in Japan. I noticed that the shrubs on the bottom right hand are still not tagged sharp, and that's because, well, it is significantly closer to me. Probably compared to the mountains behind, which are like a few kilometers away, or maybe like 10 kilometers away, the shrub is maybe a few hundred meters away. And as such, there is some difference. You can see some slight softness in the shrubs itself. Now, this lens do, I would say, as improve if you stop down a little, especially at the corners. You can see it does sharpen up a little bit more, giving you a bit more details at the corner. But I think most importantly, it reduces the vignetting rather than, giving any, I would say, as useful details, because this lens is really sharp out of the box at 1.8. Now, for this kind of lenses, there are two things that are very important to me. Firstly is, of course, the chromatic aberrations, because no matter how sharp a lens is, if there is chromatic aberration, you will suffer. And the next thing is bokeh. So let's first talk about chromatic aberration. Look at this shot here with the branch. Now this branch is a black branch shot in winter. Zoom in, no chromatic aberration. There's some branches behind too. Also notice, for the purpose of low-car, at least in a normal usage scenario like branches like this, no chromatic aberrations. I think you have seen my previous test for the night shoot in my first review. No chromatic aberrations on light tubes. They are slightly out of focus in the dark. So all I can say is that this lens, at least based on my testing so far, reviewing a few hundred shots, this lens has no chromatic aberration that I can see. In fact, this lens is probably way more corrected than the 50mm f1.2, and at least, or should I say, maybe even slightly better than the 85 1.2 in terms of correction. This correction characteristics is quite common for high-end 135. Just note, this is not unique to this lens, because both the Sigma and the Sony exhibits the same, I think, characteristics, where they have almost no chromatic aberrations, because I believe telephoto lenses are probably slightly easier to design than shorter ones. Now, I want to talk about next is the bokeh. And the bokeh for this lens, bokeh is always subjective, so I won't say that it's great or not, as long as it's not too bad. So what do I mean by bad is when bokeh is very jittery and very rough, or has too much details that you don't need. This lens, I think, sits between the buttery smooth and the textured type of bokeh. As you can see in some of the shots here, if I do zoom in on the bokeh itself, you'll notice that you can see a bit of texture, but if you look at it from a whole, I think it is relatively quite smooth. So I want to say is that this lens, at least based on my testing and my memory of 85 1.2, which I use quite often, this lens definitely in terms of bokeh smoothness, I think the 85 1.2 is better, when you consider all the branch and stuff. But overall, as a bokeh itself, I think it gives a good balance between smoothness and texture. Too much smoothness results in like a very sticker effect, and too much texture is very distracting to the eye. I think this lens, nice in between. With all that said, I think for portraiture, I think this lens is excellent. I enjoyed using it for my trip. I enjoyed shooting my friends, my wife with it. I think the output of this lens is just spectacular. It's sharp, it's accurate, it's fast, it's smooth. Bokeh is, on general, very good. I mean, the only thing better to me for bokeh, if you ask me, is probably like 200 f2 or something along the line. I really thoroughly enjoy this lens. Now, this lens, well, there is only one flaw to it, and that is the price. But what do you get, compared to the other lens? Now, I'm not going to compare the Sony GM because it's quite not fair. I mean, you are not going to buy a whole new system because of a lens, right? So let's keep within the Canon space. Now, this lens is definitely sharper than the old 135 f2. I think there is no debate on it. The old 135 f2 has chromatic aberration, and it wide open, well, there is a little bit of hazing that you can see. I think you can go online and see samples. It is, no doubt. This is definitely sharper than the old lens, which is 10 over years ago. Now, this lens itself, compared to the Sigma, my feeling, I don't have one lens now here, but I'm pretty sure that this is sharper than the Sigma, and purely because the Sigma has that very slight haze that I noticed when comparing to the 135GM, and this lens do not exhibit that haze effect. So this lens should be very similar in terms of sharpness to what I see on this Sony lens. So at least my internal feeling for now is that this lens should be sharper than the Sigma, purely because of this effect. And also when it comes to chromatic aberration, especially at nighttime, once again, this lens do not suffer any form of hazing or glow. The Sigma does have slightly, if you look at my Sigma video. So that is also the difference, and therefore this one definitely is more detailed, sharper, and if you ask me, autofocus wise, probably more consistent too. That said, I reviewed my Sigma video in the past, and also I used Sigma a few times before. I think in terms of accuracy, this is slightly better based on my experience, but I mean slightly. Technically, in most cases, this lens will probably have slightly better keeper rate, but I'm talking about between 1 out of 100 versus 2 out of 100, or maybe 1 out of 300 versus 2 out of 300 kind of difference. Very small, very minute, may not be worth your time. And then, most importantly, this lens have IS, and this is where it shines, because this lens is stable to 120 in real world shooting, and this is something that I quite safely can say that the Sigma will not achieve, because firstly, the Sigma motor is not as smooth as this motor, and secondly, the IS system on this lens is definitely more stable. You can see the difference. So overall, you are going to pay almost twice the price, but this versus the Sigma. There's also a few more things to note, that this is a shorter lens. The Sigma has one more adapter that requires to be attached, and the Sigma itself is already bigger than this lens. So the Sigma lens is going to be significantly larger, significantly heavier too. But all of this is half the price. So whether do you feel a lighter, shorter, more convenient lens, better IS, just slightly better image quality, just slightly better autofocus experience worth the double the price? And I cannot tell you what to buy, but I can tell you that these are the differences of it between this and the Sigma 135. But that said, I think this is a fantastic piece of glass that Canon has launched. I'm just a bit disappointed at times that Canon do not allow third-party makers to make lenses for them, at least not for the RF mount. And using the EF mount makes very big lenses that sometimes can be unwieldy. For me, I will pick this lens, pay twice the price, because this lens can fit in the web bag properly. The additional few cm due to the lens itself is like the difference between a 70-200 versus a 24-70. Huge difference. And I think to some people that really matters, and this is where it matters here. The other reason I will get this lens is because of the IS, able to shoot half a stop or one stop better than the Sigma, makes a huge difference in real life when you do night photography with available light. But that's about it. I hope you enjoy my short part 2 review of this lens. This is a phenomenal lens. You have to pay a premium for it, but if you are willing to pay a premium, I think this is a great lens. Now, I want to close this off and say something. Canon pricing is really weird throughout the world. Canon in Singapore at launch is always more expensive than almost anyone, at least the easier to find ones in this world. Putting this lens at 3,400 Sing dollars, or somewhere equivalent to about 2.4K, 2.5K USD. So it is more expensive than the US model. It is also slightly more expensive than the Japan model, but just slightly. I know somewhere in the world, this lens can go up to 3.8K. So yes, Singapore is more on the expensive side, but I think it's not as bad as those countries there. But I have to say that give a few more months and this lens will drop to 3.1K in Singapore. It's quite common that Singapore prices after a few months will drop a significant percentage. So this lens after a few months will be definitely more competitive. But for now, this is an expensive piece of glass, at least where I am. And if you are interested in getting it, just know that you are paying for first user, or should I say the first batch of users. You are paying for size, IS, and great image quality. That's about it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.